hello and welcome to this, our TemTeam Cup May edition. I'm Quarter and I'm here to give you another delicious match. This is Group V, Mr. Rishi versus smvid. If you're interested in our other match that is at our similar time frame, please be sure to check out TemTeam Tylo, which is currently casting, of course, the illustrious Tsubaki versus Neko Blocky as our other best of two in Group D at this exact time slot. So, now, we've seen a lot of Mr. Rishi. He's a very powerful player in a lot of separate places, and also he's pushing for partner right now. Absolute fantastic guy. Do check him out. And, of course, we should all be aware of smvid as well. He's just a fantastic dude. Did a lot of camera work for fellow tamers. Has proven himself to be a pretty innovative player as it is, with some really surprising stuff that we saw in our past few games. The Schween's Horn, for instance, the Intimidation, for instance, a lot of things that aren't expected there. Should be very fun. With that, we're just going to be waiting for both of our contestants to get into their game. Shouldn't take too long. We have word that both of them are currently available, so we should be getting in there. It's not going to take too long for this to get underway. I'm pretty excited. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, oh boy, I sure do wish I had even more things to watch today, don't you worry. Even disregarding other tournaments that will be going on later on, we also have, of course, right after this, as you can see on screen right now, Zukli versus Setsuna Faseye, otherwise known as Sorty Rum. Both, once again, pretty impressive players. Zukli, another of fellow tamers, fantastic lineup that they've been bringing to this. And in the meantime, Sorty Rum, of course, no slouch himself, fantastic back-end player in a number of separate streams, and a very talented player in his own regard. With that, I have word that both of our players will be getting into their first match. Let's have a look here. Just waiting for them both to sign in. Will be just a moment. And there we are. So, getting into our first of our best of two between Mr. Rishi and smvid. Right, so I'm interested in seeing how Rishi fares up against this. Obviously, you know, it's going to be a different lineup than what we saw in our last battle that we saw with him versus Ali. smvid having a bit of a slower paced team in comparison. So it'll be interesting seeing how this winds up faring. Obviously, the Acronox honestly trades well into a lot of what Rishi has. It needs to be aware, of course, of the Mashuk, the Gallus, and the Tulkin, but it's got potential there. Obviously, the other challenge with Acronox is it doesn't necessarily have enough of earth pressure to really push against things like Tortonite, and Valorant can be very problematic for it as well, but it could find a niche position inside this game. Rishi looking at that Loali a bit skeptically there. Definitely the sort of team that you want to take care of. It resists Ragnet, obviously a wind that doesn't have to care too much about that. However, he does have a number of Toxics that can hit well physically into it, so it looks like he bans out the Mashuk instead. The Mashuk, of course, being much more powerful into his Vulfi, means that he doesn't have to rely solely on the Tulkin, which is vulnerable, of course, to the Grumper for that. Means that the Tulkin can just spend some time blowing up that Calibus instead, or perhaps just staying out of this draft entirely if he's afraid of the Gulzi. The Mashuk is banned out of Rishi as well. We see a mutual respect of the Mushroom today, as the Nagais is also allowed through. smvid perhaps believing that he has enough tools to deal with this demonic entity that has definitely been the bane of a lot of separate teams. Decidora being really tricky for people to play around. Obviously, Ragnet being so good alongside that with its electric custodian trait, making for some pretty intimidating leads. I don't know if that's really what Rishi's going to go for here, but obviously it's a very powerful thing for him to have at his disposal. I kind of like going Valorend and then like Gallus into this, or Vola Volfi, something to scare away the Grumper and then like bring everything else in. He goes for the Tulkin though. Tulkin still very powerful against a lot of these wins that we're seeing there, also good against the Loali. Sorry, a lot of the Toxics. I can speak, honest. So, looking at smvid, he's orange on this side, so he does have to pick both of his Tems straight into this. So it's going to be pretty like, he needs to make sure that he doesn't get counterpicked too hard when he's doing this. So Grumper is obviously very strong here, but you want to make sure you have something else there to scare away the Volphy or the Gallus that will be coming in next to it and trying to make this Grumper have a terrible day. Lowali does a lot to deal with that, but I'm actually curious how that matchup winds up going. Hypoxia into a Gallus. Now, we've seen a lot of camo mirroring Gallus as of late, so special attacks into that can be a bit concerning, obviously. We do see, however, smvid hover over the Golzi, which I think is actually a very interesting take going into that. No, we do see the Lowali go in there, so if this is a Gallus that is intended to be the secondary threat on Rishi's side, that's going to be a lot easier for him to deal with. But no, instead we go for the Volphy, which can pretty much take whatever the Lowali throws at turn 1 and just throw pressure into the Grumper slot. It is no longer comfortable sitting there. Even if it has Chamomile, the Plague is going to be over half of that Grumper's health, and it's going to be quite a lot for it to try to withstand. Like, if smvid's comfortable with that trade, that's one thing, but it could still be very risky. So in the meantime, we're looking at our second bans, and Volorend is our second ban. This makes a lot of sense when you're rocking a Yukama, an Acronox, and a Calibus in your backline. Even when you have that Golzi there and that Grumper there to try to deal with wins, you don't want to overload them with threats. You already have a token to deal with, and we all know that token hits like an absolute truck with its 79 base special attack. The Calibus ban comes out of Mr. Rishi as well, which, if nothing else, keeps his Volphy and his Nagais a bit safer. Obviously, we still have some things that are going to be immediately threatening to that. The Golzi is actually looking very strong into this board if left unchecked. Obviously, you still have to worry about Dust Vortex from the Volphy. You have to worry about the Crystal Spikes from the Tortonite, things like that, but you can smack back is the issue with Golzi. There's no Kinu support for it, though, so its frailty might become a bit of a concern here. Golzi known for going down to sustained pressure before it's able to get a lot of its rotation off. The second pick looks like it's going to wind up being the Yukama, which honestly makes sense. I think that Yukama is still very powerful into a lot of what Rishi has, especially the front line. Like, you get a good swap into the into these, like, this sort of first array there, and it feels pretty good. Instead, we see the Acronox. Given we've seen the Vala ban, and we've generally seen a lot of Toxics get banned out from Rishi, this doesn't seem overwhelmingly bad as an option. However, the Gallus is still a really good way to defend against that, and Rishi doesn't even pick up the Nagais, the main thing that Acronox would be looking to fire its load off at. In the meantime, though, this does mean that, okay, so if we look at this, this is not a favorable board for Valish at all. We've got a Gallus, we have a Volphy, we have Tulkin, all of which really love matching into the Badger. So instead, it does look like it's going to be going for a Yukama instead. So with this, we get into our first of our 2 games of smvid versus Rishi, and yeah, no, this should be interesting. Obviously, this game 1, like the first opener here, definitely favors Rishi in my opinion, despite the Grumper being there, just due to the fact that this Volphy looks like it's going to be laying the smacketh down on our poor headachy boy there. Now, that said, if smvid stares this down and is, like, comfortable losing a bunch of his health on Grumper, and Rishi leaves the Tulkin in, then that's a massive loss for Rishi. But my other assumption here is that, like, we have the Ragnet, we have the Gallus, we have the Tortonite. There's a lot of defensive swap-ins for Electric on Rishi's side that he's more than capable of bringing in on the Tulkin spot. So this is my concern about the Grumper just throwing a Thunder Strike out there. Obviously, you want the Inductor proc that helps you survive all of this aggression that's coming at you. Grumper's still very valuable inside this, but more so for his Earth rather than just its Electric. So we do see the Gallus come in there. Chamomile Gallus and Mirroring we've seen give value time and time again inside this cup, as the Plague does go down, bringing Grumper down to roughly 50%. Hypoxia smacks down into the Volphy, and it gets it down to 73%, but that's, honestly, it can take that. And we do see the Mud Shower go in, predicting these kinds of swaps, but the Mirroring means that this Grumper goes even lower, going down to 20% from both the Mirroring and the Burn. This is what I was talking about in that, like, yeah, no, the Grumper's got value here, but you want to make sure it's protected, and the Gallus is just looking to carve it into tiny pieces. With the Volphy and the Gallus both threatening that spot as well, my question is now, like, if you're smvid, how do you get something favorable out of this scenario, right? Like, Acronox doesn't really want to jump in there because, like, Hook Kick's gonna absolutely tear it to pieces. If you're expecting a Crystal Bite into the swap in, you could try to rely on that, but then you still have the Plague coming in there as well. You take a reasonable amount of damage from that. It actually ate that fairly comfortably. So, right, so we see the handcuffs go down, so now we cannot see a swap out there again. It was a double in with the Crystal Bite, so that was actually a more favorable swap, but the Urushiol comes in onto the Volphy. Now, Urushiol, I argue, hasn't aged as well as you would want it to as a technique. Like, yes, you're ostensibly getting 4 Toxic there, and that 4 Poison Ticks is fantastic. Obviously, you know, we like those, and we take those. The problem is, Volphy has Bush, and Bush applying 2 status effects means that it can easily wipe that poison and gain a regen in the process, which is just really frustrating if you're trying to use Urushiol as sustained pressure against stall teams. Bush and a number of other status clearing options and the amount of immunity that we see being proliferated these days makes it a lot harder for Urushiol users to do their job. Obviously, the other side of this is the fact that now Venom Spread's online. So Venom Spread's a fantastic thing. The question is, does this Acronox outspeed the Volphy? Now, Acronox has a deceptively high speed, and with investment and 3 prio, it can reach pretty comfortable positions. The challenge with that is, usually you have to slow it down if you want it to work with the Yukama. So, depending on how smvid has his Acronox spread, this could be a really powerful turn for him, getting a lot of heavy damage onto Volphy before the bush goes down. Or it could be a bit awkward as that winds up whiffing due to the bush. So we'll have to see what goes on here. The bush does outspeed. If this was a Venom Spread, this is going to be a very unfortunate turn as the Sting goes down instead, predicting something to that end. But then, of course, the Hook Kick just smashes into the trapped Acronox. There was no real way around that. The Tenderness going down on Gallus, but that didn't stop the Acronox from biting the dust right there. Now, the other challenge of using Tenderness on a Chamomile Gallus is that, like, one of the biggest disadvantages of Gallus, namely the fact that it's a lot easier to control it on debuffs, is nullified through Chamomile. I think Chamomile Gallus is one of the best things you can do for it if you have Chamomile spare on your team, because Mirroring basically gives you extra chip damage, you still get all your immunity, and then on top of that, you get the ability to clear those minus attacks that your opponent's going to be throwing in your face. Toxic Plumes, Tenderness, all of which we've seen try to control a Gallus with. But in the meantime, obviously, all we need to see here is Rishi to swap out. Now, Yukama's not in a bad spot here, but it is in a spot where it's going to potentially get hit by another Plague. Rishi is actually in a position where I think he can feel comfortable just throwing a Plague into this Yukama just to try to make sure that it feels safe inside that. So, we do see the Volphy instead swap out as the Tortonite hits the board instead, very capable of eating the Water Cannon that may be coming down into that spot. The Water Cannon instead hits the Gallus, and while that will be a significant amount of damage, that is some good mirroring chip right there. We see this time and time and again as the combination of the Crystal Bite and the mirroring actually takes it down to 48.9%, under half, as the Tortonite takes a Resin Trap, and, like, you know, that's still a reasonable amount of damage. They're bringing it down to almost 20%, bringing it down by almost 20%. It's, you know, relatively comfortable. But the trap could be something of a concern, since obviously the Wally can then throw Hypoxias into that spot. That's the real awkward spot of getting hit by a stray resin trap there. It's not necessarily the first damage, it's the fact that you're going to be taking a ton of wind next turn. The Aquatic Whirlwind incidentally coming down onto this Ragnet, bringing it down to half health on the swap in, as Rishi does make sure to rotate out his Gallus appropriately, and the Tortonite lives on a fraction of HP, throwing out a toxic gas that takes down the Yukama as it just survives this Hypoxia. Really nice to see. Definitely a good turnaround. Very unfortunate for smvid inside that, obviously. You wanted that KO. If that had happened there, then obviously still we get a rotation in for the Gallus, but it would have been, in my opinion, you know, a bit more comfortable. It's always an awkward thing when you try to get a 1-2 punch like that and you miss by like a couple percentages, but this is the power of people teching. Obviously, you know, Mr. Rishi comes in with an understanding of what he can and cannot take, and unless you're appropriately speccing things. Like, I don't know if this is a max special attack Lowali or not, is the thing, right? So we the audience don't get to immediately know this. The uppercut, however, will be finishing off Tortonite. It doesn't take very much for it to do so, as instead the Hypnosis will be coming down onto the Golzi, meaning that we get a little bit more grace here in the upcoming turns. This also means that the oh, I was actually expecting the Gallus there. So, in terms of this, with the Volphy on the field, this is pretty comfortable because you can just sort of throw Dust Vortexes into the Golzi slot. Obviously, that's a pretty nice thing to wind up going for. But the other side of this, of course, is the fact that the Lowali can't do nearly as much into the Volphy. Obviously, like, the Gallus, even though you get the mirroring ticks off of that, like, if you take a Resin Trap, you don't want to just be going down to that unnecessarily. The Resin Trap instead goes down into the Ragnet, which will actually just survive that at 7.9%. Man, smvid just missing out on, like, KO after KO by just a small amount. Ooh, that Sandstorm not taking down the Golzi could be interesting as well. It looks like it's going to wind up working out, though, as it still did underspeed by all accounts there, unless smvid rested. I'm not entirely sure, but instead, we're still going to see a Dust Vortex come down onto this Golzi potentially, and in the meantime, like, I think you can just afford for the Ragnet to take a hit, as your Gallus can come in afterwards and just kind of clean this board up. With the Gallus and the Tolkien still ready and available, the Tolkien's not going to be doing too much, but, you know, it's available, it's there to do something. It looks like we are going to see a Plague come down just to make sure that this Golzi takes as much damage as possible. Before the Charged Iron Filings comes down, then the Charged Iron Filings, of course, will not hit the Volphy thanks to Team Elusive, as the Electric Storm comes down as well. Was smvid perhaps expecting a swap into Tolkien on 2 Electrics? I don't understand why you would use 2 spread moves with a Volphy on the field. Unprecedented to see here. Team Elusive definitely stacking value up, as the Tolkien's happy to pop in now that those 2 heavy spread moves have been used. Obviously, you still have to be a bit worried about some of the other things that are coming down here, but the Plague is going to outspeed the Golzi, meaning it goes down to this, and the Grumper in the meantime is just I guess you get a Thunderstrike off and you take down the Tolkien, but as we can see, we still have a lot in the back, and once again, this is just so unfortunate to see. This is the 3rd time we've seen just not quite a KO on smvid's side, which is really unfortunate. Obviously, like, you know, every time these happen, it's just a bit more momentum in your opponent's favor, so it's very unfortunate to see 3 of those in a single match from smvid's side, as Rishi clearly is running away with this endgame. Congratulations and well played to him as we move into our next game. Yeah, no, that was just a really impressive performance by Rishi there. Obviously, smvid had a lot of good plays going back into that, but just not managing to get a couple of those KOs was really unfortunate for him. Missing out on the Tortonite KO meant that he just lost a bit of momentum there. The fact that the 2 spread attacks went into the Volphy when it could have gone down to a melee attack that turn was also a very unfortunate thing, depending on what was read there. Just unfortunate to see, you know? I feel like 1 Charged Iron Filings and, like, the Electric Storm into the Yoshidashi there could have potentially been a better play on that turn. Obviously, though, it's very easy to examine these things in hindsight and be like, oh man, it would have been a lot better if one player did this. It's a lot harder when you're in the thick of it to make those calls when you need to, and that's what separates players. Still, though, we are getting into our second game here. We're just going to be checking out everything else. Fantastic. It looks like our players are immediately ready to get back into things as well, so we will not have any breaks here. We're just going to be waiting for both of our contestants to get into their next match. Now, once again, in terms of scoring, first off, you'll notice that we have a charming little standings thing that will be available either below or using the little tag, depending on where you're watching this, you fine folks. So the way standings wind up working with this, once again, is that if Rishi wins this next engagement, he will gain 3 points. If smvid takes the second game back, this will become a tie and both players will gain a single point. With that, we are into our second game. So we see almost immediately the Mashuk ban out from smvid. This still makes a lot of sense. You got a lot of Earths that do not want to be punched in the face. You got a lot of melee hits that you do not want to get absorbed by that Mashuk. It's just way too effective a defensive Tem inside this. In the meantime, it looks like Rishi's taking his sweet time looking at this, but there's a lot of things he could be banning here. The Grumper, I feel like he had a lot of ways to deal with that, honestly. But no, he does decide to take out the Grumper. It means that he's going to have a bit more freedom to use his winds to counteract these Toxics. Definitely something that's going to wind up favoring him. We'd still, of course, have the Golzi, which definitely had a bit of space to perform, but I think that's also going to depend on whether Rishi takes his Volfi in his first set as well. smvid has counterpick this time as well, so it's very much on him to create a state in which he can sort of gain an advantage from this opener. That is one of the powers of blue side here. The fact that your opponent has to pick something that can line up into every other member of your team in order to make sure you don't get caught out by the second pick on blue side. So we see the Gallus come in response to the Golzi, followed by I'm seeing the Nagais get looked at, but I don't think you go for a Nagais into this, do you? Let's see what if you do that, then I think Calibus just wanders in here. No, instead we see a Gallus Ragnet. This makes a lot more sense. So the Ragnet, of course, keeping away a lot of those a lot of the waters that we're seeing on smvid's side. The Gallus keeping away most of the other things there, but it does mean that Mashuk is relatively free here. Now, the challenge with that is we have 2 wins in the back and a Nagais. These are a lot of things that deal with these mentals. With these melees, and specifically Mashuk, right? So, we see Loali as the second ban out from Rishi. That despite not landing those KOs, it was still really valuable for smvid in the last game, and Rishi's definitely respecting that. We see the Valorant get banned again out of smvid, so this does mean that the Tolkien is, of course, completely free inside this match, and I feel like it's got a better time here not having to somehow square up against a Grumper, which, I mean, it happened, but it still, it wasn't as comfortable as it will be in this game with only 1 electric to try to wall those wind hits. So we see the Acronox get picked as our third option here. We've yet to see it quite achieve its true form against opponents, but there's always an opportunity for it to shine in the right circumstance here. The combination of good control through the cobwebs and, of course, being able to clear a lot of positive statuses through that is something that it does excel at, and getting a good Venom spread does change the course of games. It is not something to be disrespected. That said, it is still a niche pick and is often outperformed by other things, but we'll have to see how smvid does wind up using it. So, Yukama and Valish, very good final options here. We do not see Paul the Calibus appear today, and in the meantime, we see the Volfi and the Nagais picked out by Rishi at the end there. So, going into this game 2 between Rishi and smvid, I have to say once again, actually, no. This time, I'm looking at this opener, and it feels a bit more even, honestly. Like, the main issue here is that Gallus is kind of out in the open. 2 melee attacks hitting into that without any mirroring value coming back is not something you necessarily want, and you don't have any way to pressure this Golzi turn 1. We could easily see the Tolkien come in here. I'm pretty sure Tolkien can survive those 2 attacks, but I don't think... I just feel like Rishi's on a slight back foot in this turn 1, right? Like, Gallus can't hit this board super effectively at all. You're walled by melee, and in the meantime, the Ragnet's just kind of sitting here. It can only hit the Mashuk very effectively, unless you're P-jabbing the Golzi, which doesn't feel like the best play in the world. This means that Rishi's probably going to want to reposition. In the meantime, smvid's fine just throwing attacks into this Gallus spot. So the question is, what do you bring in there? I still think the Tolkien's powerful just due to the fact that you have a lot of other things that can hit the Acronox, but Acronox's defensive typing is something you still kind of want to save tools for. Now, Gallus is one of those tools. Instead, we do see the aggression land on the Ragnet. I'm kind of surprised about that, given how frustrating Gallus's HP bar has been, but instead we just see a wastewater and an uppercut go down onto the Ragnet as the double gash goes down on the Golzi, doing barely anything but getting our fine boy online for the following turn. The perfect jab landing in on the Mashuk on smvid's side. Obviously, Ragnet took a ton of damage from that, but I'm kind of curious, like, Ragnet doesn't hit the entirety of your team very well there, and you've got Golzi to wall it. It just feels like perhaps the Gallus was the better thing to target there. Obviously, it does open up the Yukama, a lot more comfortably there. And in the meantime, the Oshidashi comes slamming down on the Gallus turn 2, getting it down to 51% as things continue here. But I'm expecting a juicy Crystal Bite retaliating into that. The Wastewater does take down the Ragnet, though, so it definitely looks like that was still a favorable trade there, as Tireless does come online for smvid. The Crystal Bite does come down, however, and it just deletes that Gulzy. So a pretty reasonable one-to-one trade there, alongside 50% extra HP down for Gallus, does mean that ultimately I think smvid did get the better of that initial engagement. And my concern now is we didn't see any of those awkward swaps that we talked about for a little bit. This does mean that Tolkien's kind of free to come back here. Yukama is a problem, obviously. I don't think you can afford to let Volfi come in here. What we could see is Nagai's come in. So if Nagai's comes in, that seems reasonable because that's a way for you to blap out the Mashok or at least scare it away. And that's precisely what Rishi goes for here. The Decidora, meaning that you do hit before either of these Toxics, given that Acronox primarily has 3 prio things that will not be hitting first inside this. You have the potential of a reactive Vial to double back on. You can also just hit hard into the Mashok with the combination of Gallus and Nagai's before it throws things back at you. Given that Tireless Mashoks tend to be very frail, and that this one already has -1 defense, it's probably going to go down to like a Sharp Stabs Beta Burst, which is probably what Rishi's relying on here, because honestly, this Mashok's looking threatening if he doesn't have a way out of this. Now, the fact that Acronox came in rather than Yukama does mean that Tolkien could potentially come in at some point here, but in the meantime, we do just see the Beta Burst come slamming down into this Mashok, taking it down to 1.1%. The hook kick comes down as well, taking down this Mashok before it's even able to breathe on this board. The Sting hits back into the Nagai's, and obviously that's still pretty painful, but the Reactive Vial will eliminate the poison, nullifying the chance of a Venom spread next turn, meaning that the 1-2 punch does not go in here. Definitely taking it back on Rishi's side. The combination of the Beta Burst and the hook kick into Gallus due to the -1 defense there, and just the sheer power of the Beta Burst into the comparatively frail Tireless Mashok. People do not build their Tireless Mashoks with a lot of defense oftentimes. I've only ever seen like 1 or 2 bulky Tireless Shooks, and we're definitely seeing the drawbacks of that inside this, right? You can't really like leave your Mashok in and expect to Wastewater and a Guy's comfortably. Still though, we see the Valish come in here, ready to try to take things back as it potentially tries to go for a Greedy Madness buff, knowing that the hook kick is offline. A reposition here into the Yukama, anticipating the Nagai's Fury perhaps, or just trying to stay away from the Gallus and the Double Gash as the Crystal Bite comes crashing into this Valish. The combination of Fury and Crystal Bite taking it down. smvid losing Tem after Tem in the wake of this Nagai's Gallus combo. This Gallus hasn't needed to go anywhere. It's just been chilling. Still has the hook kick available. I don't believe it's overexerted. Yeah, no, it does look like we're, yeah, that HP percentage looks to be exactly where it was previously. So it looks like the Crystal Bite was just in there, unless I'm missing something there. Meaning that hook kick could just be going straight down onto this Acronox. Obviously now, we do have the Water Cannon Venom Spread combo, but this is going to be disrupted by the last turn of Nagai's, which still has its Decidora up, which is gonna be a bit of a problem for that. We have one last turn of that, I believe. It's obviously very hard to count those right now. We don't have any in-game identifiers of that, and we do see turns get skipped, but the last turn of Decidora is in effect. The Psy Surge comes down onto the Acronox, bringing it down to 25%, but it lives the hook kick. The OX goes down onto Gallus, the Sting comes down into Nagai's, and are we going to be following that up with an Aquatic Whirlwind onto the Gallus? That mirroring chip is still going to be pretty reasonable, but taking down the Gallus is still going to be pretty significant for smvid to come back into this game. The Venom Spread is also online for next turn, and without the Reactive Vial, without a Madness buff, this Nagai's is out in the open and exposed. This being said, we only have so many Tems left on smvid's side. The Tolkien comes down this turn. with the Aquatic Whirlwind blown, it does mean that this token is likely going to be able to live a single turn and get off the Windburst that it needs to really open this field up a bit more. With the Volphy in the back, after this Nagais goes down, my question is, how does smvid deal with it, right? Like, you lose your Acronox this turn, there's no way around that. The Windburst actually outspeeding the Acronox! The Venom Spread does not go off, and the Nagais is safe, as the Blizzard instead goes down into the Nagais, entirely ignoring the token as the Nagais' Fury comes down. That is not what I'd expected to see there, folks. So, with 4.6 HP, no stamina, and a prayer, this Nagais is still on the field, as now Tolkien is perfectly capable of throwing a Tornado in, but it will have to eat an Aquatic Whirlwind first. While the Aquatic Whirlwind will one-shot this Tolkien, we still have a full HP Volphy in the back, and no stamina now on this Yukama. So, the challenge here once again comes down to Volphy, especially in the late game. Team Elusive just means that you can't clear up is the problem here. Oh boy, we see a cooperation as, I don't know whether that was like a cheeky admission of defeat or what, but it definitely was just a lovely little end note to this game as Rishi takes away our second one. So that is 2-0 to Rishi. He will be gaining 3 points out of this. Congratulations and well played to both of our contestants once again. Rishi definitely bringing back and reminding us that he didn't get 2K wins, 2,400 wins or something like that for nothing there. smvid still bringing Acronox and just having a fantastic and spicy team. Very interesting to see. If you're looking for more matches, we do have more matches available in no small time. We will, of course, have Sortirum versus Zukli. I believe that will be cast by the illustrious Gen 10 as we move into the later parts of this day. So that's going to be fantastic for people to watch. I do hope people stay tuned for that. In the meantime, obviously, if you haven't checked it out, the VOD is, of course, up on our other channel, TemTeam Tylo, for the match between Nekoblocky and Tsubaki-chan, which of course happened at the same time period. As it stands, I will once again thank everybody for stopping by, and I hope that everybody has a fantastic day. Please stay tuned for more spectacular matches.